Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
Welcome back, everyone. We talked last time about this thing called emotional resilience, and that's in your personal life. Now we're going to take it to your professional life and how that translates to your job, whether you're an employer, an employee, whether you run a team, whatever it is. It can be a game changer. And the question is also why, when you lead a team, somebody makes a suggestion, you don't take that suggestion, even though it seems reasonable. What's going on there? We're going to unpack all of that with an amazing coach. One of her specialties is trauma, where a lot of this comes from back in your childhood. And Laurie Kroeger is back with us. How you doing, Laurie?
I am doing great. How are you today?
I am good. It's good to have you back here. Now, before we dive in, let's reset what this thing, emotional intelligence, really is.
So we're actually going to go into emotional resilience, which is very similar
Okay.
to emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is really about gaining that control over your emotions, where emotional resilience is being able to feel through the emotions, bouncing back after an emotional turmoil, after an event in life has drug you down or created you, this extreme emotion that you don't know how to handle. So oftentimes we end up with emotional resistance where we are bottling it, we're shoving it into the back of our brains, we're stuffing it down inside until it explodes. So emotional resilience is allowing yourself to feel the feelings and not have a reaction that's going to cause a negative effect in your life.
So we take that, now you move it into your job. And it's interesting when you say that because a lot of the challenges that come up at work are different than your personal life. Different personalities at work, dealing with the boss, or if you are the boss, dealing with those employees, and everybody's different. So you got to kind of figure out what's going on. But somebody says something, pushes a button, triggers you. Tell me your overall view of the job and emotional resilience.
So when we really think about emotional resilience in the workplace, a lot of times as an employee, we don't have a lot of control. As a boss or a leader or the owner, we often fear that loss of control. And so where do we bring in the emotional resilience to be able to accept that there may be another way to do something? And for the employee, how do we find our voice and the confidence to speak up without the fear of losing our job? And a lot of that comes down to the team leader, the boss, the CEO, the owner, opening up those doors and not being afraid of words. They're just words.
Let's focus on an employee telling their boss, "Hey, you ever think about it? Maybe doing it this way?" Why the boss is not taking that suggestion? Is it ego? Is it fear of maybe their job? How come you didn't come up with that answer? And Mike did. What do you think's going on there?
I think a lot of it has to do with the ego. Obviously they want to have all the best ideas, and if it's not their idea, it's not a good idea.
Hmm.
There is that fear of loss of control.
Mm.
Well, what if this idea doesn't work and that comes down on me? It sounds great in theory, but I don't know. I don't want to take that hit. I'm not willing to take that risk and look bad.
Mm. You said a key word. I didn't identify it. Control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Control is huge.
Yeah.
And when we have that fear of loss of control, we tend to react poorly.
Yeah.
And, even when my mom was diagnosed with the multiple myeloma a couple of weeks ago, I have no control over that. And so I went through the whole process. I cried, I screamed, and I allowed myself to feel those emotions, knowing I didn't have control to change it. And then I was able to make better decisions because I allowed myself to process through that. So when we process through those emotions and get past the fear, We open up our ears so that we are willing to listen and we can take in the constructive feedback. If something's not working well, or maybe it could work better, having that ability to just listen and process without getting emotionally angry or, fearful, then so many things can be incorporated in a better way. And it empowers the employees. It creates loyalty. Like my employer listens to me when I have an idea. And sometimes it may be, you know what? Let's shoot this rocket to the moon and it'll work so much better. I'm going to shoot my little brother off to the moon. It may be some of the craziest ideas, but it triggers a thought process. And within that thought process, new ideas are generated. Better things come up. Everybody gets to participate.
Sure. Yeah. It feels like a team as opposed to a dictatorship.
Yes.
What do you do in that situation where you feel you're the employee and you feel that you're not being heard at work? And, let's say your supervisor, that it's not just you. You've heard it from other employees. I'm
Yeah.
creating a scenario. Other employees say the same thing. Yeah, I don't know why they do it this way I suggested. And it fell on deaf ears. Yeah, I did the same thing. I don't know what's going on. Is there anything that can change as an employee in that situation? Or it is what it is, kind of look for another job. Your employer doesn't have emotional resilience.
Exactly. And oftentimes that's why we have such high turnover.
Hmm.
So as an employee, it's really important to find your voice and communicate it effectively. You don't want to go up and say, oh, what you're doing is crappy. There's so much better ways. It's all about how you approach the conversation. Hey, boss, you know what? I see that we're struggling in this area. And I know you've had some really good ideas. Can I bounce another one off of you? We do the compliment sandwich. Make the boss feel good. Give them your idea. Make the boss feel good. But using and having the confidence to use your voice and knowing that I don't care how dumb you may think an idea is, it can trigger more ideas.
Yes.
Just having that ability to have the creativity process. And like I said, it creates that loyalty.
It's wonderful when it works. And I know exactly what you're talking about. I worked for this company about 10 years, and they really didn't take ideas. I left the company, and now they actually work for me. Like they were a vendor for me.
Yeah.
So I was invited back in at a brainstorming session. They never did that when I was there. I don't know why. Different management.
Yeah.
And it was wonderful. The entire team showed up. No idea is a bad idea. There were, I'm not going to say whiteboards, but almost like uh, huge sticky pads up on the
Yes.
wall. And everybody would write, in a certain funnel of topic. And then they would go back and then vote on the different pieces of each topic. Genius. And then you come up with a wonderful, it was marketing related. You come up with a wonderful idea and campaign that is very usable. And, people get accolades. Man, that was a good idea. I didn't think of that. Huh?
And then everybody's on board because
Yes,
everybody had the ability to contribute. So
exactly.
everybody's there, they see the vision, and it just brings the whole team closer together.
Such a win. Such a win. And no judgment. And even to the point, somebody would say something and you turn and say, Jeff, you freaking crazy. Where'd you come up with that? That'll never work, but good idea though,
Right?
but it
But
feels good.
it opens up those lines of communication.
Yes.
I think that's really, really important.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so that how do we get our leadership? I call it creative leadership.
Mm,
And allowing that creativity to flow within your teams. So I'm contemplating opening up a secondary piece to visible potential and working through the creative business strategies, not where I'm going to go and give them strategies. I'm going to help them develop their own strategies.
sure.
Working with, customer etiquette, employee etiquette. How do we bring these teams together and create that loyalty and reduce that turnover? Turnover is expensive.
100%. And this is what I experienced at a restaurant recently. Um, I've been there once or twice, didn't really pay much attention. This time, just a small little restaurant. The staff was so engaged, and each one of them had their own role. And you could even on the specials board, you could tell it was the handwriter of, say the hostess. And even as they were bouncing around, they were so connected right down to the music. You just knew that they were allowed to pick the right music. They were given they sort of given the keys. Here you go from the owner.
Yeah.
Their loyalty to the restaurant was wonderful. But guess what? I now feel loyal. I
Yes,
I want to go back because I felt loved in just
exactly.
very little ways. And I even complimented you guys are so nice. I mean, you're on top of everything. Cool music, by the way. It all kind of worked together. So
Yeah.
I believe that they had like ownership of it. But now, and I've been there before, and it was all right. They make some pretty good drinks. I go back for that maybe. Different now. Like I want to go back and I hope.
It does.
Which
And it also then creates that customer loyalty that
that's my point.
it retains your customers.
That's my point. Yeah,
It's
yeah.
amazing. I'm going to throw out a little plug for this adorable little restaurant called Charlie Parker's. But they had that same thing. And, it was my daughter actually introduced me to it. And apparently it was on another show. But the cohesiveness they had with the team, you know, no waitress walked around without the coffee pot. It was, you never had an empty cup. They were always helping each other.
Mm,
There was no animosity. You could feel the difference. You could feel the energy in the
that's it.
environment.
That's it.
And if you have a place where you work, where you have that energy, you look forward to going to work.
Yeah. Yeah. And the customers look forward to coming back.
Yeah, there's less burnout. You have a lower turnover rate, and people aren't calling in sick
Yeah.
because they're happy. They enjoy going to work. So as an owner, as a boss, as a CEO, how are you going to create that inside of your company?
So
What
true.
do you need?
So let's flip it around. Let's say you're the boss and deep down inside, you admit to yourself, I don't feel comfortable taking ideas for whatever the reason is, whether it's your ego, whether it's you're insecure, whether you fear for your job. How can you build emotional resilience where you have some strength behind you to say, I'm going to take that. Let's do that. How does that work?
So the very first step is just that awareness, realizing that, oh, okay, yeah, I am doing this. And then taking a look at why are you doing that? Where is the related unresolved issues or trauma or the unresolved emotional turmoil that you may have felt somewhere that has created that fear? Maybe you're afraid you're going to look stupid because you didn't come up with that idea because somewhere your uncle 10 years ago said, well, that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Right.
And you let it stick. Or, you know what? Your cousin was brilliant. He came up with this idea. Well, yeah, you're the one that told your cousin that. And
Mhm.
so just that level of awareness first brings that step forward. And then you can look at the why and you can say, okay, this is how I want to go forward. And you can start working on those pieces. And the 26 weeks to emotional resilience really goes through that step by step and understanding that this step builds upon this step, this awareness. Then we have the growth mindset. And then we're going to look at optimism, really focusing on each one of those to build that
Mm.
emotional resilience. It's not an overnight process.
There's
As
so
much
many
as I
things
would
at
love, as
play.
much as I would love it to be.
No, I mean but doesn't this go right back to what we've said in the past that it all comes from your childhood? Because now I just got a different view of this. Let's say that employer, that boss, that owner um, has that fear of taking an idea. There could have been situations in their past where they gave an idea and somebody stole it.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's so much at play here. But I guess The first step is admitting it. And I'll be honest, maybe back in the day, I was kind of fearful if I was in a leadership role, somebody had an idea, I would take it and I would process it. Where's it coming from? Where can it go? How is it going to change the scenario? That was in a different place. Now bring the ideas on, man. I need ideas. Let's go.
Well, and then, you're taking this thought from somebody else, this idea, and trying to fit it into your belief system. And they may have a completely different vision. So without that communication,
Yeah.
you may think that, oh, we're going to take this pulley and we're going to do, we're going to pull it up this way. Well, when in reality, the vision is to maybe do a linear or, something that's going to create more leverage. But you're not seeing the same vision because you didn't have that conversation.
It's so true. It's almost as if we all have internal filters and we filter everything, including the idea, through, like you said, our process. How's it going to look? How's it going to feel?
And if it doesn't fit into our box, the answer is no.
Right.
So now let's look outside that box. Let's listen. Let's generate new ideas. Let's come up with new, innovative, creative ways to make things happen and involve your employees.
Hmm. Is there a way to do that tactfully? Back in the day, suggestion box, could be anonymous, put ideas in, whatever it might be. Is there a way to foster that?
One of the things I don't like about the anonymous boxes is those ideas go into the ether and you never hear back. It's like, okay, well, I put an idea in, but I don't know what happened with it because they don't know who to come back and talk to. So how are you going to foster that? Let's say CEO comes in, you know what? I really know that I have hired some amazing people and I want to see what kind of creative ideas you guys may have. Just be transparent. Understand that it's okay to have had a different outlook in the past. Say, you know what? I've really been kind of stuck in my box and I need your help to get me out of that box. Transparency, authenticity, honesty, integrity. Just be real. Tell them, hey, let's do this.
Or it could be you have a challenging situation in your company. We're taking suggestions. Here's the
Yes.
challenge. How do we fix it? And then if somebody's ideas is selected, they become the star. And that's all with good reason.
Right. And it's like you said, our filters prevent us from actually, have you ever been watching TV and you've had people walk in front of you and you don't see them because you're so focused on what you're doing?
Yeah.
Our minds do the same thing with our belief systems. We see just what we want to see. And when somebody else brings something up to us that doesn't fit, we're like, it just goes in one ear and out the other. So then have that conversation. Tell me more about that. Let me hear your vision. What does that look like? They're really simple questions, but they're very, very powerful. Tell me more.
We mentioned the word ego before. Can we go back to that?
Absolutely.
How do we define the ego? And I hear it, in all different, not just the definition, but how the ego, it's good. Your ego, it's good to have an ego. It protects you, but then there's not, there's a bad part of the ego. I think we should go there. We haven't really talked about the ego.
So the ego, it really is an important aspect of a human being. The ego is what creates our confidence. It builds our independence. When we take that ego and use it to be over somebody, to exhibit power over instead of power within, that's when the ego becomes a problem. And those are the pieces that we need to look at. Am I using my ego? Am I being confident or am I being a bully? What does that look like? And that piece of awareness is astronomical.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, how do you get around your ego? And how do you identify when your ego shows up?
Sometimes it's a blind spot and it needs to be brought up by somebody else. Those are really tough conversations. but we need to hear them. When we start to see that people are not engaging in our lives, when we start losing relationships or we see things are breaking in our life, we may need to check our ego.
Mm.
If you're not willing to listen to somebody else and say, hey, I've kind of noticed this, maybe there's a new perspective that we can look at.
Yep.
If you're not willing to have that conversation, there may be an issue with the ego.
I'm glad you said that. And I shared with you, I joined a men's group, I don't know, like 6 months ago. And ego comes up in conversation, but just what you said, having somebody else identify it, because there's been times where somebody presents a situation, we get, mask down. That's what we say. That's one of our principles. So you talk about stuff and somebody will call you out and say, bro, that's your ego. It is? Yeah. Don't you see it? You don't realize it. So,
And that's it. They don't see it. We as individuals don't see it.
right,
We think everything is normal. We're just doing our normal everyday things. This is who I am. I am who I am. You're not going to change me.
right. Which
If
there is
that
some good to that.
mindset, that's a problem.
There is some good to that. I believe where
Yes.
you stand up for yourself. This is the way I am. I won't back down. Stand me up at the gates of hell, but I won't back down. Tom Petty, love you.
Yeah.
Um, there's there's some good there, but then sometimes, there's a wrong reason for thinking that. And
Yeah.
sometimes that can be the ego coming into play.
Yeah. When you're standing up for your values and your morals and, you're really standing for a purpose, that's different. But when you're just, that's the way it is. That's where your ego may be having control
Yeah.
over your emotions.
Hmm. I look at that. I try to process that, how your ego can control your emotions. I don't easily make that connection. Just don't. I'm trying.
Well, that's where the emotional resistance often comes in because the ego says, I'm bigger than this. I'm not going to cry. You know what?
Mm.
This isn't worth my time. And so a lot of times it just gets stuffed back behind and we bottle up the emotions. We push it behind until one day
Okay.
when you decide that, you know what, you're going to go into the restroom, there's no toilet paper, and the explosion happens. And now your whole world is crumbling around you. You go out, you're storming, it's everything is coming out because the icing on the cake hit.
Wow.
And how often does that happen? And how often do we break relationships? How often have we lost a job? And then we go into, okay, well, I'm going to numb this. I don't want to deal with it. So now we're going to the substances. What are we going to do to avoid this pain instead of really allowing yourself to just feel it and go through it?
So are you suggesting that, let's say you have an emotional challenge and your ego is saying, no, we're not going to react to that. Don't cry. They're not worth crying over. We're going to squash that down. And then other challenges come up. They're not even connected to that situation, but that's where you implode because your
Yeah.
ego got in the way of letting you process the emotion.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. Is that known as the meltdown at some point?
It is.
Wow. Okay.
That is the meltdown. That's where, we've hit that breaking point and we can no longer control our reaction to a situation. And literally it could be just as simple as you dropped a pen on the floor and you start bawling.
Wow.
It can
Yeah.
be just the smallest thing, but you've got 6 weeks of emotions or 6 months or 6 years that have now just been let loose and you don't have control. And
Which
that's where
is,
a lot of problems happen.
I call it the emotional backpack. And sometimes it
Yeah.
gets so heavy, but now I look at it in a different way. It's like a powder keg on your back, and dropping the pen was the igniter.
Exactly.
Wasn't even connected to the powder
Nope.
keg on your back, but that's what set it off.
But that's what
Oh,
hit the explosion. And
yeah.
so, yeah, what are we going to
Interesting.
do let's remove that powder keg. Let's take
Yeah.
that off and just take the time to process through the emotion. Maybe you don't
Sure.
want to be sitting at work and bawling. Okay. That's where emotional intelligence comes in. Okay. I
Mm,
need to process this. maybe right now is not the right time. So I'm going to take this home and we're going to reflect. And that's where we're going to process.
Wow.
Sometimes we don't have that control. Like, I guarantee when I found out my mom had cancer, I bawled. I mean, it was almost instantaneous. Like,
As you should.
And our brains automatically go through worst case scenarios. And so I allowed my brain to do that. I allowed my mind to look at, okay, worst case scenario. We know what could happen here. Okay, so now we have this and we can move forward. And now look at best case scenarios. Look at the hope. Let's find what we can do versus what we can't.
I love so much about you in your transparency and your practical application of everything we talk about. Because it can be a little woo-woo, emotional intelligence, emotional resistance, how it all applies to our lives. But you apply it in a way that's practical and very easy to understand. And that, I believe, is your superpower.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I really mean it. I really mean it. It's everything you say. I'm taking it and applying it to situations I've been in, maybe am in, and how that comes into play, as opposed to, well, I don't know, it's kind of hypothetical what you say, and maybe it makes sense. No, it makes sense. It totally makes sense. If somebody's trying to make sense of all of this, going through a lot, whether they're a business owner, I know you also support businesses and help foster, a lot of positivity there. How do we find you?
You can find me right on Visible Potential. Just go to visiblepotential.com, pop in your information, send me an email. I will absolutely reach back out to you. You can also call me at 719-619-9399.
Wonderful talking with you today. Thank you for making it so easy. Appreciate you and positivity and positive vibes for your mom too.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll talk soon. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, I mean, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.